Hello, good evening everybody. Welcome on the 11th edition of Architecture Now, a talk show on architecture that we, since the beginning of this year, are producing together with the BNA, Dutch Organization of Architects, the Organization of Dutch Architects, I'd say. And tonight we'll be talking about data. And as data is quite a complex topic, I thought it might be a good idea to narrow it down a bit. So we have a full program with lots of projects and lots of things to think about. But data as such means nothing more or nothing less than facts. Information is expressed as numbers to be able to process through computers. We have come to connect the concept of data to engines, binary numbers, computers, algorithms, and big data. But the meaning of data also includes values and ethics, ambitions, non-binary hopes and dreams. We have come to view the concept of data with a critical eye. They are not value-free, not necessarily transparent, never complete, difficult to connect, and even if we would have all possible information, we are still human. And we may decide otherwise. Just as we knew more than 40 years ago, based on solid data research, that the extraction of gas in Groningen would cause earthquakes in due time. Beside data, we have values, short-term interests, and political or financial agreements, and that may lead us in different directions. Emotions still beat data, and maybe always will. Data, we have learned, are not just lying around in big numbers. We need to think about them, on how to collect them, to store them, and to use them. In times of unprecedented technological change, every building and designed public space is a potential generator and transmitter of data. But the other way around is also true. Any data source can be transformed into design. Do architects, urban planners, city managers, citizens fully grasp the potential of all this? What possibilities do we have in the first place, and what examples? That will be the focus of tonight's edition of Architecture Now. And that may sound easier than it actually is. Or, as Mira Bredhouder in tonight's panel has mentioned it, I put it in research, especially in the case of urban dynamics, researchers have been operating in data deserts. As much of what we know about cities has been derived from small data studies, characterized by data scarcity, static snapshots, and coarse aggregation. Big data, however, offer a promise for a shift to urban studies that are more data-rich, dynamic, and entail high resolutions. But how? Tonight's lineup can be viewed as a more detailed search for data applications related to design possibilities, new roles and new responsibilities. The first part of the evening will focus on how designers can use data in various scales as design input. And the second half will concentrate on the role of design regarding data output. Starring in the first part will be Mira, as mentioned before, Fred Schorel from the BNA, Bart Misper-Blombeijer and Bram van Ooyen, who, while designing on the future of Eindhoven, discovered that while implementing big data in design is vital to sustainable future-proof urban planning, useful data are lacking, difficult to link to other data sets, and usually focusing on functional topics, leaving social and cultural data behind in the aforementioned data deserts. They are, however, vital to be able to design for uncertainty. In the second part of tonight's lineup, we will dig deeper into the built environment as data carriers, featuring Gijs van der Velde and Alex Schuldener from AutoCAD. Reflections from Linda Vasserood and Douwe Schmidt from Tada will reflect on how to collect, manage and use these data in a meaningful manner. And this might be the moment to excuse Ger Baron, the CTO of the City of Amsterdam, who has fallen ill this afternoon, so he wasn't able to make it tonight for the panel discussion. So we have to do without the voice of the City of Amsterdam itself. But first, let us start with a small-scale, simple yet brilliant project by Heren Vijf and Dingeman Dijs. Jeroen Atteveld, there he is, will present their design based on data collected from the Dutch housing search engine Funda. With over 3 million visitors each month, we can definitely talk big data. But does it lead to the perfect house? Jeroen Atteveld.
Good evening, everybody. In 2016, we got a phone call from Funda and they asked us, could you design the Dutch dream house based on Funda's big data? And wow, that is a super nice question as an architect to get, because every day we are trying to envision what our future residents want and how they want to live. And therefore, this big data could be a great input for our way of looking to architecture and things that we make. Because in our daily practice, we noticed that that many of our clients, developers and housing corporations, ask us to design buildings with fixed layouts, fixed or standardized span sizes, standardized materials. So Funda's big data could be a really nice input for another view, because you could ask yourself, is this really how people want to live nowadays? And we think that the Funda House, or the Funda House for us, is a plea for better listening to future residents, and therefore big data is a very interesting new way of looking at things. Before I continue with the design and the Funda's data, it's nice to have a look at what Funda has, because 1 million visits per day, already mentioned, 10 million searches per month, and 1 billion viewed houses per year. That shows that Funda is among the top 10 biggest websites in the Netherlands. And to understand who the fun seekers and the serious seekers are, Funda designed an algorithm. And in this algorithm, they put in variables such as how many clicks per housing object, per object, or how much time spent looking at a picture, or even up to if somebody sent an email to his real estate agent, is the data that Funda uses to see if somebody is a serious seeker or a fun seeker. And with this data, we get a great insight in the Dutch residential landscape. And interesting is that in the Netherlands, the Netherlands is one of the most densely populated countries in the world, even the densest populated country in Europe. And perhaps that is the reason why the Dutch really like to have a front door on the street, a backyard with an achterom. There's not really good translation for that. And it's really interesting. So if we zoom in on the Market Explorer that Funda uses, we could find out that most people are looking for a detached house. That's what you see here in blue. And if you compare that, for instance, with people looking for row houses, and if you then compare the amount of transactions being made, you see that more than twice as much row houses are being sold than detached houses. So it's quite interesting to see that the wish is quite different than what we actually buy in the end. And I think that it's interesting to see that the Dutch then take it for granted that they have to live close to each other. And the row house, therefore, is maybe one of the most typical. It's a very typical housing product in the Netherlands. In fact, of all the countries in the world, we have the most row houses. If you would all stack them together, we would have a skywide street from here to Beijing, with on both sides continuously row housing, Dutch row houses, which is quite impressive, I think. It's always nice to. I grew up in one, so it's always nice to see here. If can I see some hands for people who grew up in a row house or are still living in one? Well, this is pretty average, I think, maybe 50%. And I think in the Netherlands, 60% of all the people, or 70% of all the houses in the Netherlands are row houses. And interesting is that this is what you, as a representative of the Dutch, are looking for. This is the top 24 most watched houses in 2016, and like you can see, most houses here are villas and big castles. So that was our starting point for the design, because if you put all the data together, you see that people dream of villas and castles. They, in the end, wish a detached house, but only have money for a row house. And that is our starting point. Because we dream of a castle, we buy a row house, and what we did is we designed the Funda house, and that is basically a row castle. With it's spacious, with a sense of freedom. It gives more privacy, and at the same time it's very open and light, and it all fits in this typical Dutch row house. So we are going to fit this thing. This is among the top 24 most viewed houses in 2016. We're going to fit this thing inside a row house. But how do you do that? Before we started really designing, we also had to take a closer look of how these row houses are built up. If you look at the layout, you see that this is an older row house with a 6-meter span. You see there's this surface area here that has the kitchen, the stairs, toilet, and here is the big living room, the classical Dutch doorsonwoning. And oh, sorry, I'm going too quick now. And on the first floor, you see that there. Sorry. On the first floor, you see that there are 3 sleeping rooms, and on the second floor, there's the zolder. That is basically the attic, the multi-purpose room where basically anything could happen. And moet ik daarheen richten, want hij pakt hem niet altijd. Ja, oké, gaat. This is the castle. This is originally a stronghold. And in a castle, you see that there's this big central space where all life takes place. And the stronghold is made with thick walls. And inside these thick walls, also called pochés, we find there the supporting spaces like toilet, bathroom, kitchen. And basically what we've done is we put these two typologies inside the cocktail shaker. And starting with the traditional section of the row house. Er zit een vertraging in volgens mij. Nee. Yeah. Okay. There he is. Yeah. So what we've done, we made the poché that you see here. That is that ensures more privacy between the public space and the private domain. And inside the poché, you see that we make the supporting spaces that you also need in a house. And last but not least, ik doe even zo, ja. Last but not least, we try to open up these spaces to get enough light inside and to make connections between the different spaces in the house. And to actually make this big living room, we also understood that we could not make big sleeping rooms of 12 square meters that you find in a standard Dutch row house. But we have to make the room smaller and give it more identity to actually do that. So this is the Funda house. This is your dream. At least what I think and what I hope to hear later on. And this is how it works. When you enter the house, there's this the big space basically that you see here. That's where living takes place. And there's this corridor meandering all the way up to the doorson attic. And all the different rooms are connected to the big space via the meandering corridor. And if you look from the outside, then you see that the building is a bit more closed off than its neighboring buildings. The sense of openness that we used to like is maybe not so important anymore. And at the back, we have a double opening door so that friends and family can take the back door. And yeah. So when you're in, you see that there's the big living space with on the left-hand side. You see that there's the entrance to the walk-in bathroom, and on the other door is the entrance to the bedstaykamer. I'm not sure if there's a better word for that. Tracy, I'm looking at you. This is the walk-in bathroom, so you can set the whole bathroom underwater. You can sit there and look through the window outside on the street. And the bedstay room. This is a very small room, but yeah, just enough to sleep and to hang up your clothes. Yeah. And this is the tower room. This is the master bedroom where we will also find like a small bathroom inside. And this is then the doorson attic. This is also the multi-purpose room where you could have an extra sleeping room. That could be the study or the playroom for the kids. Yeah, this is in short our presentation. The current status is that we are now talking with Funda and some other parties, and I can't say much more, but in the beginning of next year we will come out with more information about how we are going to get this built. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeroen. Please keep the mic for a while. We may have some questions from the audience. If so, simply raise your hand. And I also have some questions, because just to ask a little bit more about the status quo. You're going to put it on the market, is what you said?
Well, yeah, we are talking now with Funda and some other parties, and we are working on a way to get this built. And in the beginning of next year, we will have like this big news item where we're going to tell a bit more. And
it will have the average, let's say, 100 square meter floor area, like any other row house?
Well, yeah, it's the average row house has maybe 120. Our row house has approximately 100 square meters, because we make one big space, therefore we lose also some. But we also think that we don't need to think in rooms anymore. It's also about how life takes place inside a house, and that is maybe much more important to think of.
And it will also have like an average market price?
No,
depending on the city, of course.
No, we just found out that it's going to be a bit more expensive than we hoped, but that's also
not as much as a castle, probably.
No, not that much, but it's kind of interesting to see. But because the standard row house is being is in a way cheap, because they are easy to build, easy to produce. But the efficiency of building it itself seems to be the goal, and we think it's much more interesting to think about how people are going to live there for coming generations, and then maybe a 5.40 m span is not so important anymore. And I think it's good that with those questions we can really open up the discussion.
To expand from this, because you've done more research into different areas, like elderly people that want to live in the city, or families that want to stay in the city, and while collecting the data, you refer to them as warm data, which I found a very fascinating concept. Can you explain a bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, in warm data is, for instance, in the research Nestle in the Stad that we've done, we did research on how families want to grow up and live in the city, because we noticed that they are moving out because they can't find their housing, fill in their housing needs. And with warm data, I mean that we actually went to many people living in the city and just asking them how did they grow up. And we noticed, for instance, from a family that I went to in the Kolikit-buurt, was a Turkish family, and they explained that they also had a house in Turkey, and I was drawing their house while they were explaining to me how it looked like. And while drawing, I understood that they have a much richer way of looking at floor plans than we have in the Netherlands. Because, for instance, the standard apartment here has maybe a 7.5 meter span, but you enter next to the sleeping rooms, which is in a way very strange, that you enter the most private part of the house. And it's really interesting that there's so much knowledge with let's say normal people, that we don't actually listen to. And I think it's really interesting to get that information inside the future houses.
Mm-hmm. And then referring back to the Funda house, did you use warm data in any way to come up with this final design, or was it purely based on the Funda data?
No, this was purely based on the Funda data. It's of course our translation. If you would have asked another architect, it would have been a different design, I think. So the interpretation of that data makes it also special. But it's also pretty hard to design the house for the Dutch man.
So, your interpretation of data, of course, will be also maybe one of the main topics of tonight, as data aren't, let's say, free of values and always open to interpretation. Mm-hmm. What were the most important data sets that you used or connected while designing this?
Well, we noticed that the Dutch are looking for a sense of space and freedom. maybe because we are living in such a dense country. And we found that out, for instance, in a village Dongen in Brabant, on the second place of the search results. People are looking for the size of the plot. So the bigger the plot, the better it is. So the more privacy you have. And also in Amsterdam, on the fourth search result was that people want to have an outdoor space, like a balcony or like a garden. And those themes kind of indicate for us that having space or having a certain getting out is super important for the Dutch people.
Okay, thank you very much for this presentation. Jeroen Atteveld. So let's try to see if we can implement the lessons learned from this small scale project to a bigger scale. And then I would like to introduce you to the Stad of the Toekomst project. Fred Schorl, director of the BNA, please come forward. We have some questions for you, but there is a small introductory film of the project. So let's just have a look at that first. It is in Dutch only, I'm afraid, so I will show just part of it for you to get an idea of what kind of project this is, and then Fred will explain more.
Studie Stad van de Toekomst. Je begint niet van de tabula rasa uit, zoals de Chinezen dat doen. En dat is denk ik de uitdaging en ook het interessante, dat je uitgaat van een bestaande stad. Ja, hoe je dat op een nieuwe, inspirerende manier kunt vastpakken en die kunt vastpinnen hier in Utrecht-Oost, dat lijkt me fascinerend en daar word ik heel graag op getrakteerd.
Als je kijkt naar welke gebieden hier geselecteerd zijn, dan zijn dat toch zeg maar de grote internationale topgebieden die een enorme ontwikkeling de komende decennia kunnen doormaken.
Ja, eigenlijk heb ik heel veel ideeën wat ik wil doen en dat gaat denk ik waarschijnlijk niet. Maar ik denk sowieso heel erg nadenken over hoe we een plek maken waar iedereen toegang tot heeft.
Wat was ook alweer jouw vakmatige achtergrond?
Retail-adviseur. Ja, omdat hier natuurlijk een enorme retailopgave ligt.
En ja, natuurlijk die woonmol, daar moet iets mee. Dat kan niet anders.
Het is interessant van Rotterdam-Alexander dat het een traditie heeft van de toekomst uitvinden via de SIAM.
En we zien de opgave ook in het licht van de groei van steden.
Als je historisch besef hebt en je kijkt naar de middeleeuwse stad, laten we die zo zeggen, die een fantastische mengvorm was. Dat we nu eigenlijk in een nieuw paradigma zitten waarin we moeten gaan leren van die oude stad. Met de kansen van de hedendaagse technologieën.
Wat wij eigenlijk voorstellen, dat is om de SIAM opnieuw te doordenken vanuit het optimaliseren van de rol van de voetganger.
We zijn natuurlijk met eigenlijk een voorspelling bezig naar de toekomst.
Je hebt de neiging om antwoorden te geven op de vragen die er nu zijn. En juist het aardige van de Stad van de Toekomst is, je weet sommige vragen niet. En dat vind ik altijd een beetje het ambivalente er ook aan.
En wat ook heel erg opviel vanmiddag was dat iedereen heel erg die menselijke schaal en die inclusiviteit hoog op de agenda zette.
Fred, even if just looking at the images, you can see that this is a project with lots of designers, lots of cities, lots of research and all kinds of levels. 2 weeks ago, the results were presented at the Pakhuis De Zwijger. Could you maybe give us a summary of the most important findings of the project?
Yeah, well, how to put ocean in a bottle is of course always a problem, but it was an ocean of ideas and inspiration for everyone, and also the energy of the ocean, to put it like that, because it was just an incredible process during a year, and what was very special was that the energy during the year was present at every stage of the process. What was at stake? 5 cities selected a piece of their city, a part of the city, 1 square kilometer, and 10 design teams designed the city of the future by just one thing, what was very important, of course, what will be the effect of all the transitions that we are confronting now, we are facing nowadays. So on energy, on climate, on social cohesion or social separation. So the big issues of the future. How will it be in 2040 or even 2050? What will be the effect on the city of the future? So it's a sort of typical what-if question. And it was not only a design operation. It's what we call it research by design, but it were actually all the teams, and it will be illustrated further on, were multidisciplinary. So there were different people, market people, public people working for public authorities together to research, to make a sort of design by researching all these issues and what will be the effect on a scale, well, to 2040.
Yeah, and today, as we are focusing on data, could you elaborate a bit on the role that data or data played within the various team results?
Yeah, well, actually, from the BNA we already presented, and you know that a while ago, future scenarios for architecture and architectural practices, because of the issue of the impact of technology on the field of architecture and the way architects cooperate with each other, work in their offices, but also have to work with their clients and with cities. So for us, technology is really one of the great challenges of the future. Working with data, not in every design or plan that was presented, data are very much present. So it was not. It were not 10
did it
data.
bother you?
Sorry.
Did that bother you?
A little bit, because what you said up front. Because we are trying to make architects and other people aware of what the technology, how the technology might influence the future. It's a what if, so we don't know, we're not sure. It's like your exercise with data in the Funda house. You can do it on the scale of a city also, but there is no logic in it. It is a narrative approach. It is not science, you know. So it's very complicated. But I think we have to be aware that it will have a great influence on the future of the cities.
And do you think designers are aware enough of that, based on your 10 teams working on the future of the city?
I think if design wants to have the added value for society at large and in a sustainable way, we have to be more aware of what are the effects. And if you're talking tonight on data, but artificial intelligence, data, the robotization, you know, all these development, we know them all, we read them in the newspapers, of course. They will have influence on the future of design, but especially on the future of life in cities. It will influence tremendously how we will live, how we will move in the cities, how we connect. And now coming to the future of the city. So not in every plan data was central to the solutions or the possible futures that were designed, but nevertheless it was really present in some of them. The general principles of design coming out of the City of the Future project was that proximity, for example, will be a key for circularity in the future. So proximity it means the walkable, the bikeable cities. You know, the car in much of the designs was really seen as something that will not dominate the future cities. So that was really a sort of red line you could see through the designs that were presented. And there was a lot of stress on, so it has to be proximate, it has to be walkable cities, but also mix. So not the separation of function, but the mix to the max, as I always say, will be part of the future of our cities, and that will also have some influence on the mobility patterns of people in the future in their neighborhoods. So neighborhoods will be more complete neighborhoods. To put it like that.
And then one last of your results?
Well, one of the things was from stuff to services. Space as a service. We are now collecting stuff, and in the future we will live our lives more influenced by all kinds of services that are made for us. So, and the services are on the system level. So energy, water, but also green, the green city. So new alliances are necessary to have the systems of the future cities working for ordinary people, to put it like that. So that is very essential to it. And flexibility. A lot of teams concluded that it is necessary for the future that we plan 80%, that we don't plan 20% of the future cities. So the space for flexibility of the future is very essential. And looking to data, in my opinion, data is very important, but the algorithms might be even more important. What do you do with algorithms? And then you enter, of course, privacy, and one of the main aspects of the future city. How do we feel in the future city in our private lives? Are we leading a life that is Big Brother is watching you, or is it a different life? So I think architects are very well, they have the talent to bridge these paradoxes of the future and try to convince and inspire people, decision makers and others to work on this city of the future, a future of cities where we want to live instead of where we want to go out of it and go into the countryside. So that's basically what was happening. And
so, and then there was one of the 10 teams that actually focused on data, Team Triangle, that will present their plan shortly.
Yeah, Triangle, yeah.
What for you was the most interesting lesson to be taken from that project?
Well, I don't want Bart to say something that you also want to address, but in my opinion, they tried something with data, to put a lot of data into a model and try to, well, more or less design the space of the future city. If it was a success or not, in my opinion, is now not very important. What came out is that designing through data always needs a human factor to it, and that might be the designer or others, but it might be the designer to make it a livable environment. So I put it like that, and Bart will say it much better and much clearer than I do now, but I think really that is one of the interesting things. Another one is also InCity, the team of InCity, who also had this digital city maker as a way of trying to make the city of the future. So, and that added to the proximity labels, the mixed use indexes, the zipper space, free space that you can zip together if there is a necessity for a new function in the city. So there were all kinds of, also on the level of instruments, not only concepts, but instruments, new things that might, well, make this possible futures of the city more things that we can focus on now and collaborate, and, you know, connection, to connect and collaborate is the business model of the future. So let's try it.
Thank you. This was a very elaborate research. It took a year for these 10 teams to come to their conclusions. Yeah. The book will be ready in January? No, April?
No. It's
April.
It's a book, so it has to be April, of course. So
April.
It will be well, I have to underline that it was more than 1,000 people who worked on this project through a year. So, in my opinion, one of the main effects is that we did collaborate with each other from different perspectives through a year. So also on the city level, a lot of people now can co-create on concepts and on things that have to happen. So that was, in my opinion, very inspiring energy for the future. So
thank you very much. Okay. We're looking forward to the book. It has lots of information in it. Thank you, Fred. Let's have a look at this project by Team Triangle. It will be presented by Bart Mispel-Blombeijer from Tangram Architecten.
Good evening. I stick to my paper, otherwise I will not be within my 10 minutes, which is already 4 minutes over time. Well, Triangle is a multidisciplinary team. It's already stated here. In a year time, we projected a visionary strategy on Eindhoven. And I start with a small detour. Do I have a... So I give some information on the specific question on Eindhoven, because why Eindhoven? At first, there's a huge building program expected. Secondly, Eindhoven is miles away from what its ambition is. It has a strong brand, which is of course technology, but it's not supported by its city's atmosphere. So there's a huge challenge only from this point of view. So this is the city center, and people who know it know the Technical University, the center. It's 5 villages. Well, I don't have a pointer, never mind. In the middle, you see Vellenoord, and here you see our square kilometer that we had to focus on in principle. So this was the assignment, and let's say some principal questions from a urban point of view are how to connect north-south, how to create a new center, and how to proceed with a huge program that has to take place there. And I take you to 2040. Imagine the municipality did a spectacular intervention between the Bijenkorf and the city's station, the train station, the train which divides the city really roughly into two, and the connection of the two will be made by, will be initiated by the city's municipality by a huge square, which we called an agora ensuite, because that's two sides, and it's below the train as well. And this square is spectacular and will be the new brand for Eindhoven, because here it's the dry version and will be the place for city parties like the Dutch Design Weeks, for fixed exhibitions and commercial enterprises, all on the theme of technology. And they can show techniques on urban systems and especially on the big themes and transitional themes like climate, energy, mobility and so forth. So here you see some images what it could be. But the second phase that it can have is even more spectacular. We can let it flood, and like this, it has a sort of wet appearance, and it can cool in summer, buffer in winter, and so it can store the stormwater that is a problem that we have everywhere in a more densified city. So we think on this scale it's new. It could be a showcase for technological abilities and typical for the new Eindhoven brand. And we think Eindhoven needs this kind of incubator to start the new development for the rest. And here you still see the plaza and you see the rest. And what you see is about 1.5 million square meters of program. And just a side remark, the city's first idea was to put in 3 million, and it's already heavily densified. But this will never happen. We cannot preview 20 years. In fact, it's a really old-fashioned approach to urban planning, because, and this was not what we were looking for. Our aim was not the city of the future, but the strategies for planning the cities of the future. And of course, we did some illustration, and that's what I just showed you. Our end goal was not a rigid urban plan, but we wanted to find a generic and more fluid spatial strategy, which we wanted to test on Eindhoven, which is really something different. Why is that? We think today's strategies match no longer. They're mostly based on gut feelings, opinions, personal relationships, expert visions, and are biased and subjective. There are new means that we have to do better planning, like we have to find answers on the big transitions that we are facing. There is a bottom-up empowerment, so people living there want to have influence and on the right time. And we have data available. How do we do this? So what you could say nowadays, and the past decades, we were planning on the daily urban system. That's what we see every day. And we forgot all about the slower, more invisible transitions like the climate, energy, ecology, mobility, and demography. We have to take this into account if we want to look forward for some 10 or 20 years. So we thought we should be going in search for new methods and instruments. At first, we recognize a triangle, that's why we are called this way. The golden triangle of sustainable urban development has a physical, a social, cultural, and economical side. Only when there is a balance here, you will reach a sustainable, livable environment. That's why we had experts from all sides, and we discovered that they're not always able to talk with each other, so that gave some real big quarrels in our team. But that's almost the real world, I think. But we discovered a second triangle, and that's based on data, policy, and design, and I will explain a little bit more about this. Between data and policy, we have ideology and values as a filter. Between policy and design, we have a filter that's called subjectivity or creativity. And between design and data, we could have, if we have the right means, measure instruments, objectivity to calculate what we're doing. So in fact, what we should do is take all these three into account, put them in an iterative process, and turn around a few times, many times, searching for the, let's say, the best center between everything. So I will tell you a little bit about every part of it. And of course today we're talking about data, but I think it's okay to start with data, because with data everything starts. We see a lot of new opportunities. There's a wide array of new and valuable information. You could say it objectivates, we have new insights, and it could separate us from the old assumptions. But there are challenges and implications, and we will discuss about it later, especially the interpretation and the structure. The interpretation of available data is a problem. And then again, most data that are available at the moment are about quantity, but what about quality? You can have happy people in a poor neighborhood. How do you quantify that? So this is what we say, the city is a structure, economical, social, political, but it's directed by values. So it's much more than a sum of numbers. But we experienced with a data engine of Tigron. So what you see here is it sucks up all the information that's available from the internet on our square kilometer. But again, you see, if you look at the side elements, you see it's mostly about the physical side and nothing about social-cultural. I think this is very important for discussion afterwards. I proceed to policies. Policies are about opinions, politics, decision-making and participation, and the end goal should be agreements on several themes and issues and getting everybody in the game in time. So if you see what is at stake, Fred already told about it, we have these transitions. I will not go into that much deeper. We have to decide what transition to solve on what scale. Not everything can be done on the neighborhood or even in the city. These are choices. And to make it even worse or make it even better, as you want, we have much more players on the table, and the new ones are the other stakeholders like neighbors and local enterprises, and they're not per se professionals. So what you have to do is make complex matters into smaller pieces to make people, to make it able for them to make the right decision on the right time. And so we designed an urban transition game, which is called Felinopoly for Eindhoven. And we played it in a role play with several people from municipalities, our central government, everybody in a role, even the role of the buurt, the neighborhood. And at the end of the day, we reached a coalition agreement, which we could say is the program of demands for the actual urban design that was to follow. Of course, we had long talks about how much program can we house. I will spare you for this. But this, again, now we're back in the design. And about the design, we had really clear statements. Because everything is changes, policies are changing. Maybe in 4 years' time, Geert Wilders rules Eindhoven, then there will be no 20,000 Asians that we're expecting right now because the borders are closed. So then everything changes. So you need a plan that's able to adapt on these changing circumstances. So we thought about a three-dimensional grid that, depending on when a plot comes available, these are plots divided by the real ownerships, that will define finally in the 20, 30 years to come what it will look like, and it can be everything, and we just tested it a little. That's how we got here. And if you see it like this, it even moves, but I will go on. I go back to what we were really talking about. this is our lessons learned. We think the strategy is defined by these three issues. About policies, we need a structure that enables more players on the table. On design, we need preconditions for changing the program instead of a fixed master plan. And for data, we think it is the basis for a better design, but we have to learn to come to a right interpretation, and we need clues for social data. And I'm really curious about what other people know about this. I finish with this sentence: the future is uncertain. We need to give this uncertainty a controlled place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bart. Can you put the slide one back, please? Can you put it one back to the previous slide? Because I think that holds the key. This one, the lessons learned. And may I invite Mira Bredhouder and Bram van Ooyen to the stage, please. Grab a microphone, give them a round of applause. Thank you very much. You are all part of this design team, the Triangle team that focused on Eindhoven. Mira, you did a lot of research into data and how urban designers and planners use data in their design processes. Do you think they're doing a good job, or does it need some improvement?
Well, for instance, does it work? Yeah, okay. For instance, we use the Tigran platform, quickly shown in the presentation. And what Bart also mentioned is that it focuses a lot on the physical aspects, and there's a lot of physical data behind it. But I think the most important goals in many area developments are the less tangible ones. And we need data for that as well, to see whether our designs are actually making the impact on the more social or more broadly economical aspects, if we're doing the right thing for that as well. And that's still lacking.
And what is the reason for this lack of these social cultural data? Are they not there? Are they difficult to find, difficult to collect?
I think Fred also already mentioned it. The algorithms you need to make that tangible. So which links do you assume there are between different data sources? For instance, when you look at social media, there's a lot of data on how people behave, but you need to link that to other data as well to be able to say something meaningful about social cohesion or vibrancy or things like that, the less tangible ones. And you need to link those all together and also find the right types of links and the right algorithms to actually say something meaningful. And that algorithm might be different for every city, so it goes into a lot of depth.
Okay, we may get more into that later. If anybody from the audience has a question, please raise your hand and I will come to you with a microphone. Meanwhile, I'm going to Bram. Bram, you did the research from the MAST office, the Dutch Urban Design Office, and you focused on, let's say, the big data, on the big transitions in energy, climate, food, etc., which had to land on this square kilometer in Eindhoven. Did you find any problem there?
No, I think we all are coming to the same conclusion, because I think big data you can split up in two different sets. One is the data from the physical domain or from the objective reality. There are things that you can make quantitative, like climate change, mobility aspects. But the other set is about social data. That's about the subjective reality. And that comes to preferences. Also, these data has for different people different meaning. Because of cultural background or ideology. So that makes it really difficult to make the city of the future, because data have the power to make things more transparent. But while actually city making is this construction of political, economic and social values that are based on ideology. So decision making about the city of the future is based on ideology, which also
I will refer to your introduction about the example of Groningen. It does not always mean that the most transparent option will also be executed.
Which brings us back to the notion that data and the use of data also always will need a human factor, as was mentioned before. But you both mention the difficulty of getting these let's say the more soft values and the more difficult to find data on personal preferences, on behavior and stuff. If it's so difficult, what is needed to be able to implement it into design, Bart?
You asked me the question that I would have asked to other people. So that's
any help from the audience is welcome.
That appeared to be the question, and we had enormous discussions on it because this question came up and we didn't solve it until so far. But we recognized the necessity to solve it because the other way, the alternative is to just forget about it and stay doing what we were always doing, and that's much worse. So we have to learn to find the key for this. But I'm really hopeful that there are people in the audience who have an idea about how to implement social values into data.
As long as the audience doesn't provide the answers, which is probably quite difficult also. You started this project 1 year ago. You found a lot of difficulties. I think a lot of naive thinking went down the drain along the way. It's quite complicated to get all this together. What did you learn to bring into a next project? Is if you want to conclude or include data and a more how do you say, in a more inclusive way into the design process?
I think when you're serious about getting other stakeholders in the process, they need to be in the upper circle and not, as we do it often, after the design circle. So the old way of there is a plan and people are allowed to find something about it. There are lots of recent examples on this, and people say, oh, we don't want these high towers or whatever, but that's way too late. You need to bring them in the process, and that's difficult, but it can work. On a smaller scale, I have it in an actual building site in Bos en Lommer. Might mean not the complete circle, but we draw people in the decision process before we started with the design to know what we, and that's something else, I think, than the old-fashioned participation game. So you have to take them seriously. And because the questions are so complex, you have to break the questions, and that's something new, that's a new game. And I think many people think it's so complex it will take more time. I think it's on the contrary. If you do this, you take people aboard, and you will not have all these long-lasting procedures that we see everywhere. And this is one of the clues to avoid that. That's one of the reasons that developers are so afraid of building in the city, because they do it too late.
But on the other hand, you did find a solution to bringing these social data into the game because you designed the game. Yeah. And so one way of finding these data is collect them yourselves. Mira, I was wondering, because we're focusing now on all the troubles and difficulties, what do you think was a very positive thing that we could take from this project and this case?
Well, I think the ambition to incorporate data like this with such a platform, it's a really high ambition, and well, you might say it's not completely succeeded, but in a way it did, because it sparks the way to do this more and better. And I think it's also, we had a really high ambition. We were talking about a digital twin of the city. I think that may be too soon, but you can take parts of it and you can now look at, okay, for instance, can we just model a little part of those social aspects with the data that is present and see how certain design futures impact that, and just do it step by step. So I think the ambition is very good, but it might be too high for now, and you should should do it step by step.
Okay, thank you very much, Mira, Bram, Bart. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. And also for bringing us to the next stage of this evening, because apart from collecting data to use into design, you can also use the design to collect data. And this is why we invited Gijs van der Velde, who started with a master in international law and then joined Joris Laarman, where he became partner and part of the design of the 3D printed bridge. And from there on, went on to MX3D, which is actually the smart 3D printed bridge. Gijs, where did you go? Ah, all the way down.
Thank you.
A warm applause, please.
Are you gonna click?
So, Gijs van der Velde, we created a 3D printed steel bridge over the last 3 years, and today I'm going to explain you a little bit how that came about and why we are so concerned about data, creating a digital twin of what we made to understand how bridges can be built in the future by robots. So we envision robots, digital manufacturing to become core in the way we build our environment, and of course data is central to this. So most of the work we do at MX3D now is not anymore figuring out how to 3D print metal, but how to make this smarter, how to make this autonomous, and how to make this intelligent. So we created a machine out of basic tools. So we bought a second-hand robot, connected the welding machine to our software, and everything we do is software. So many people would see us as a hardware company when you come in. Guys have black faces from the metal work, but ultimately most of the work is done in the software side. We're not architects. We started out as a group of designers. We're definitely not scientists. The way we work is probably also not very data-centric from the beginning, but as you will see, we'll slowly work towards that more and more. But I found a nice movie that shows how we work and how we get ourselves enthusiastic about the project.
Ja, her har vi togskinnene og de tekniske tegningene, og Martin som begynner å bli ferdig med miggen. Det er bra. Ja. Får du nok batterier til togstopper? Ja, det er masse ekstra batterier også. Henrik! Kjapp deg ned, vi må ut! Kjapp deg, Henrik. Kom Yes, ass! Yes! Dritbra! Yes, ass! Det er nydelig! Det er dritbra! Det er nydelig!
So I'm not sure how much data they used to create the design for this loop, but it is really cool, of course, to do. And that's also how we view all of our projects. So if there is not this coolness factor, if we don't understand really why to do it, it's not a project for us. And it's also helps us decide what steps to make, because if you're doing something innovative, you're not able to do everything at once. So you should try to do one thing really good, and that's showing people why to start on a new innovation or a new technique anyway. We came out of Joris Laarman Lab, a Dutch design agency based in Amsterdam, and he made a name for himself with the bone chair, which is a topologically optimized chair based on an algorithm that mimics the way bones grow, the way trees grow as well, and it takes away material where you don't need it. So having a digital design process like this, creating your chair, your object, also drove us into the arms of digital manufacturing. And in this case, this meant for the first time we worked with 3D printing. Because there was no metal printing around yet, we used a sand mold printer that could create the mold that we used for casting the aluminium in. It was the start of a long journey along all kinds of 3D printing. And we figured out that no one was really creating a printer big enough to make tables, chairs, small pavilions. So we decided to buy a robot and try and figure it out ourselves. So the goal was really to escape the traditional boundaries of the 3D printers you have seen around a lot. So we wanted to have a robot that could move, that could create structures without the need for support. And we did that with a very fast curing two-component resin. It was a nice experience. It really showed us that it was possible, that the concept worked, but we didn't really know what to do with this specific material. And then one of our engineers came up with the idea of let's try to do the same thing, but then with our welding machine. So welding machine on there, and we started doing small spot weld lines, just the same as with the resin. And then we also started doing more continuous printing against the wall, just to show that, oh yeah, in theory you could 3D print metal like this. We put this all online. We have great experiences with sharing all these early innovations, so to attract new people to join the team in some capacity or another. And that led, yeah, from one piece to the other, but ultimately to our 3D printed bridge project. So the bridge project came to life when we were challenged by Autodesk. We went to San Francisco after they've seen our early videos, and they were like, okay, looks really interesting, but what's your next project? What's your moonshot project? And yeah, we didn't really have a good idea yet, but in one evening we had this yeah, great enthusiasm, and we thought we're all living in Amsterdam, and what's better way to prove that this technology is now ready to have a constructive bridge over a canal. So the idea was really simple. We wanted to put two robots to work, slowly print their support structure and move their way towards the middle. Of course, it was a bit more complicated than this simplistic drawing, but if you know everything in advance, or if you let yourself know everything in advance, you never start anything fun. So quickly we realized that this was not something we could do by ourselves, so we had a lot of people involved. By now it's a great consortium of people that somehow have supported the project, so we're also quite open in the collaborations. We don't try to lock everything in very firm contracts, but we just accept a new team if they have something valuable to bring, and we see where it brings us in the end. So the initial design looks a lot like the drawing. It was probably more based on the designer's idea that he had in the very beginning, so Joris Laarman in this case. And we wanted to make this very lightweight, topologically optimized tree structure for the support of the bridge. So we worked out the entire design together with Heijmans. We printed out all these single parts in the bridge to prove that we could do it. And then we came to the conclusion together with the city that this was not a bridge that would ever be in the red light district, because one of the major problems we had was that if one boat hits the main trunk there, it could all collapse. And of course, yeah, we don't all like tourists, but nobody wants to see that happen, of course. So this was in end of 2016. We already spent 1.5 years of budget and time on this project. Big disaster. So we had only 2 months left. So we got in more knowledge basically from Arab, and together with them we came up with a little bit simpler design that still allowed us to showcase what this 3D printing technology could mean. So what you see is the two bridge heads are not exactly parallel. So we use that to showcase that we can now do a fully free-form bridge, and the force lines that come out of that are an important part of the eventual design. But by this time we realized, our, normally a little bit more loose approach towards projects would not work for a bridge. So we started to become much more data-centric, starting to officially build a digital twin, initially filling it with all kinds of preliminary research, and more adding data based on actual results on our work floor. So after having the first design, we started printing, and this first part has been fully tested. That gave us the confidence that the full bridge would also be able to hold itself and the whole load that it would have to take. And we started really building it until the end. I have a small video that we released maybe 2 months ago, just before we went out to the Dutch Design Week, where it was presented for the very first time. And it also explains you a little bit how we took a lot more data-centric approach to this project, which is also leading up to the talk of Alec later. So this bridge will end up at the Stoofsteeg, the Ouderzijds Achterburgwal, hopefully around the end of this summer. They're starting the renovation works finally after a couple of big disappointments there that took a long time. Some houses were coming down a little bit, so they had to repair that first. But now it looks like they're able to finish it, and this bridge will end up there for a couple of years at least, including a very intelligent sensor network.
Thank you very much, Gijs. Thank you. How did you solve its vulnerability to boat accidents?
We made the bow as a one piece, so it's a much more solid part. So if you sail into it, basically you just shift the bridge a bit and you don't break it.
Has become flexible.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm quite sure there will be some questions from the audience. I would like to ask Alec to come forward first, because he has more information on the data implementation on the bridge, and then we can ask the question and pose the questions for the two of you together. Is that okay? Alec, you're one of the partners of MX3D, supplying the clouds for all the data information, and we are very interested to hear more of how you have proceeded. Before you start, how many people actually walked the bridge in Eindhoven during the Dutch Design Week? Some 10-20% or something. Did you use our data on that bridge then?
We collected your data.
And did you do anything with it so far?
We are processing it now.
Okay, carry on, carry on.
What that means and what that does, hopefully will come to light as I talk about this. So my name's Alex Schuldner. I work for Autodesk. I think almost all of you, if you have any involvement with the architecture profession, know about AutoCAD, so you know about what we mostly do. But we also increasingly are doing experimenting with IoT, with software to build things, and also software to manage and watch those things as they operate. And one of the things I do for the company is I get involved and I create these projects which help us experiment with IoT and learn more about it. So this was MX3D's bridge was a test bed for us to learn an awful lot about how you could instrument things, collect data on those things, understand how those things perform, and then ultimately use that data and that information collected to drive improved designs and automation of improved designs of those things in the future. Our initial engagement with MX3D, as Gijs described, was around the software, the work that they were doing to drive the robots to print. I came on at a later stage and said, well, don't we want to do something in addition to that, which is to make sure that we understand how this thing is performing. You're using this material, which is incredibly novel, untested, really not well understood material. You have this design which is completely unorthodox, and how are you going to know how this thing is actually standing up over time? Is bridges, as Gijs mentioned just a minute ago, do sometimes fall down, and it seems to be happening a lot lately, but we want to know if it's going to happen. We want to see that those sort of problems developing with the bridge. We want to understand how it changes its shape and evolves over time, so that we can understand how this approach, this 3D metal printing, what sort of properties it really produces in the objects that it creates. So we went ahead and we designed a sensor net, which is made up of a lot of different sensors that you saw, to put on the bridge. But before we did that, I went home with this idea, and I said to the people I work with, well, how do we do this? We don't actually have anything there's no playbook which says this is how you instrument something to watch how it performs, certainly not something of that kind. But we did have a bridge in our offices, and we have a sort of experimental space, a lab on a pier in San Francisco. And we have software for working with very high volume data streams coming off of sensors, and for processing that and for visualizing that and modeling what that data is doing. So we pulled together a team to do that, and we created a digital twin of a bridge that we had in our offices, and we put, you see all the green bubbles there, we put sensors all over that bridge, and we have lists of the sensors that are on the bridge, and we have data that comes off of those sensors that we're able to see at any particular level of granularity we choose to. But the goal of the project really was to learn as much as we could in advance of making the MX3D, similarly outfitting the MX3D bridge. But the stretch goal for it was to be able to get the bridge to understand how many people were on it at any point in time, to be able to query the bridge and have the bridge report on the number of people, its occupants, the number of people that were on it. So we've managed to do this, and that taught us a lot of what we needed to know. And using that knowledge, we then went ahead and we worked with MX3D and the rest of our large group of partners on putting sensors on the bridge so that we could take the bridge to the Dutch Design Week, where for the first time it was built in its complete form, assembled in its complete form, and was available for people to walk over it with a functioning sensor system, which picked up data, which had cameras that were picking up these skeletonized images here, and data that was picking up the sensors on the bridge. And the sensors are really fundamentally of two sorts. They are sensors which are capturing how the bridge is changing and reacting and moving in response to the things that are happening on and around it. So things like strain, accelerometer to measure motion of the bridge, inclinometers to measure how the thing is bending or twisting. So a variety of things to measure its physical reactions, and then a set of sensors that measure those events, what is happening on and around the bridge, things like temperature, changes in temperature, but also very importantly, the presence of people on the bridge and where they are and how they're interacting with the bridge. So the bridge is going to go to the red light district, where it will replace, this is the spot on the Stoofsteeg, where the existing bridge, the current temporary bridge, which I think actually now Gijs is gone. I think they've just removed it. Yeah, so maybe after this discussion, I'll go bike over there and see if it's actually out of the way. But I'm under the impression that bridge is now gone, and our bridge will be coming in to replace it. And this is obviously a very different environment than the nice, clean lab we have back at work. It is also a very different environment than the Dutch Design Week, and it is a big question as to whether we're really going to be able to also get this bridge in that place to be able to tell us how many people are on it at any moment in time. If we can do it here, we can do it anywhere. It's probably the most crowded couple of square meters you're going to find anywhere on the planet. So it's a challenge we welcome, but it's definitely a big question mark to my mind. The crowds that exist there and the desire to measure just how big those crowds are is by no means an idea that we've come up with or a unique insight of our own that might be a useful thing. The city is constantly trying to figure this out, but as was mentioned earlier on, those sorts of data studies tend to be very episodic. They tend to be limited in duration. They tend to collect a limited amount of data. So it's a brief, focused view of things, but it's something that even in that with those limitations is very interesting for the city, important for the city to understand. And of course, the city wants to understand it so it can do something about those crowds that it is experiencing in the red light district and in other places in the city. So this is again another shot of that same bridge we'll be replacing, and over there on the far right is the junction box where that sign that I showed you in the last photo was. So this is the place where they're doing this study. This is one of the places where the city wants specifically to know how many people are there at different times of day, what is the crowding like so that we can start to do something about it. And the way they're doing it is they're collecting information on the cameras. They have computer vision capabilities and some other data collection that they do to allow them to do counts of people on the bridge. The other thing you notice, though, in this picture is that there are a lot of people who are not using the bridge the way that we would maybe expect people would use bridges. They're not trying to get across it. They're just standing on the bridge. So this is something which, if we were to go back to the other picture, you would see it there too. You would see it in any picture of the bridge. No matter how crowded the bridge gets, people take a moment to stop on the bridge and to block traffic flow, which is exactly the sort of behavior that the city is concerned about, exactly the sort of thing that leads people to wonder about or worry about crowds and have to take steps to do crowd management. So this is a very common thing that they do, and it's sort of one of the problems that we hope to address with this is to be able to understand this behavior, this sort of alternate use case, this conflicting use case for the people who are trying to get from one side to the other on the bridge. The other thing that I'd point out, though, in the upper right-hand corner of this that I think is a problem here, and a bigger problem, is the presence of the camera at all. The red light district is not a good place for surveillance cameras. I mean, I don't know of a lot of places that are places where I would welcome them, but certainly the red light district, which is a place where there are women, of course, who are working there who would rather not be filmed. There are men who are visiting those women who would rather not be filmed. And I expect many of the people here are not really thinking about it, but they would rather party in an environment that was free from this sort of oversight. So the camera is a problem, and I would like to do something about that as well with this project. So here we are back now at Dutch Design Week. And you see our bridge there, and you see these two poles on either end. And at the top of those poles, you see those cameras. I showed you a little video earlier on with the skeletons on it. Those skeletons exist because those cameras are seeing people on the bridge, and we're using computer vision machine learning techniques to identify those people and to paint them into skeletons. And what we do with that is we then, and we need that because we really need to understand what's going on the bridge, or we're not going to be able to count how many people are on it, which is this key thing that we want to understand. And we're going to need to see a whole bunch of this sort of thing because people are going to do things on the bridge that we really don't understand and we don't anticipate. And if we're going to get good counts of what people are there, we're going to have to learn about that. So we're going to have to collect a lot of this sort of data. We're going to have to collect terabytes of this sort of data in order to get the machine learning algorithms that we use to be able to keep giving us this answer within a reasonable range of confidence of how many people are on the bridge. And so what we do with this in order to get this answer is we take these instances, for example, the skeleton up there stomping around on the bridge, and we create from that skeleton's motions a set of training events. The skeleton stepped on the bridge for the first time. There was another footprint. There was a contact with the handrail. Somebody exited the bridge. A whole series of things which we take from the video to the skeleton motion, from the skeleton motion to the training events, and then correlate using machine learning techniques against the physical response of the bridge to those events. And so the goal is that over time, as the bridge gets better and better and better at recognizing what is happening on it and the physical effect that it causes, that at a certain point we'll be able to remove the cameras and the bridge is still going to be able to tell us simply from the physical response that it registers how many people are on it, where they are, where they're going, how fast they're moving, how long they've spent on the bridge, whether or not they're a dog, and more questions like that. So the goal ultimately is to be able to get rid of the cameras. And not just to get rid of the cameras that we're using to do the survey on the bridge, but perhaps even to go beyond that and to start to show a way that we can start to get rid of cameras in public spaces while still serving the needs of police and other authorities. That is a police camera that's there, other authorities that place those cameras there in the first place. We can do more than that. I don't know if we can do that, but if whether or not we manage to do that. The other thing that I wanted to share with you, or a proposal that I wanted to share with you, is that Amsterdam itself is a city of bridges. And the study that we mentioned that the city's already doing, and the insight that our bridge will give when it's in place and functioning, is happening really just in one place. But it is something which could be expanded to the rest of the city. So if you had bridges all across the city reporting to you how many people were on them at any moment in time, you would get some very interesting capabilities. It's a hard thing to get, but you don't have to have it with great precision, and it's a simple single fact that's comparable from bridge to bridge to bridge. So if we know that from multiple bridges, then the first thing we can do is we can start to do exception detection. Why is this bridge at 0 when all the bridges around it aren't, or when it wasn't at 0 at this time yesterday? In this case, this may be a drawbridge. We've got a little sailboat there. I'm going to assume that that's what it means. And this isn't a problem. It simply means the bridge is open. One of the interesting things you realize when you start to instrument things and you start to get some analytics on top of them is that even those simple things allow you to see things sort of from 90 degrees and realize that you've built something which counts something else. So one of the things that this gives us is by counting occupancy on a bridge is we now have a rate of passage of ships through that point. The second thing you can get is, of course, exceptions which actually do require attention. Somebody's got to go look at this. There shouldn't be a bridge that has 10 times as many people on it as on any other bridge immediately around it. Something's gotten backed up. You have one of those situations where somebody's blocked the bridge or a crowd is formed on the bridge and there's an issue there that requires attention. But the thing that I think of most value that you'll get is you'll get a heat map of population movement across the city. And I think in the context of this room, I don't have to go into a lot of detail about how useful that might be. We've just had these presentations about the studies done for cities and how we need to understand cities as dynamic things and be able to deal with that. This gives you a picture of that dynamism. And if you can invest in creating the mechanisms that have the infrastructure itself report this information to you, this comes for free.
Thank you very much, Alec. Gijs, please join us. Does anybody have a question for Gijs or Alec about this very interesting data mind project? No one, really?
It's obvious, otherwise you wouldn't do it, but I'm really impressed by the fact that, do I understand correctly that every movement, single movement, you read from the bridge, you can translate into, if it's a dog or if it's something, that's the whole thing, isn't it? Translating.
The bridge in San Francisco actually does know if it's a dog or not. It's not a random, that's not a random choice. We actually, Autodesk has a bring your dog to work policy, so dogs show up in the audit office with some regularity, and at a certain point people realize, wait a minute, we've got to figure out what's going on in the data, and so it's dogs on the data, okay, we've got to do this. Every motion you make, every motion at all that occurs in physical reality generates counteracting responses in everything around it. So with enough sensors, I'm convinced, and this is something I actually want to really be able to push our prototype to do. It's not something I think we want the MX3D bridge to do, but your gait is more distinctive to you than your thumbprint. With enough sensors in the floor, I should be able to detect the difference between your gait and her gait and his gait and his. I mean, it's something you don't need the proof of. It's something you can think about sort of just logically. Every footprint has a certain weight and it's coming in with a certain force in a certain tempo. And sensors now, it's not just that this is sort of theoretically possible if only we could have enough sensors. It's that sensors now have become so cheap and so easy to hook to each other and so reliable for the most part that if you can do the hard work of getting all of the data together and analyzing it, you can see these things. I think increasingly we need to be populating the environment with those sensors, and we need to be doing it intentionally, because it's happening right now unintentionally. Right? Everybody is going out and they're buying their, this device, which actually is full of all these other sensors that they're not aware of. The city is buying things and is itself not aware that the new infrastructure it's installing has all of these sensors, which are sending data to all sorts of places. We need to be self-conscious about this, because it is going to happen whether or not we pay attention to it. Who owns what?
Who owns the data is, of course, a very interesting question.
Well, in this project, it's an open data project. So we have Lloyd's Register Foundation is one of the sponsors, and the city is involved. So one of the conditions was that this data becomes publicly available. And it's also what we think is very interesting, because then we can give designers, architects, app builders the possibility to do things that we haven't expected yet. Because I think, there's not that many open sources available, especially not in a crowded area like this. So it's a good place for experimentation. So we have a 4-year project around this. It's the NWO scientific funding around it from the TU Twente and the TU Delft. That are also going to focus more on how can you use this data socially, or how can you collect social data, and then how can you give back valuable information to change that area in a meaningful and pleasant way, because that's where a lot of Amsterdam people are waiting for, is not just counting how many people are there. Everybody can see it's very busy, but and it's never going to change unless we close the area down. So it's more about how can you actually do small interventions and measure the effect of these interventions, so you can do your policies based on data, and we hope there's other people than just the consortium that is involved now that can help us out on that. So the data is it's actually since today it's available for the people that are directly working on it, and then hopefully soon we can set up a way of sharing it. As Alex said, it's a lot of data, so we have to figure
how
out
is
practical ways.
the municipality actually involved in this? Because it's accessible to everybody. It will be a website on your website, or an Amsterdam page, or an Autodesk
Yeah, so
page?
the AMS is involved. I guess most of the people know that here. So they do most of the collection of big data sets here in Amsterdam. We also hope at some point that we can do good connections with other sets that are available. In principle that will be their role. But I think the universities also have a duty to share this information online through their
And who will
service.
read and interpret the data? Because now, so far, Alec is doing this, but probably you won't be doing that for the rest of your life. So who will be doing the analysis of all these data?
Well, I mean, that's why it's an open project. So we have the Alan Turing Institute in London. They're going to focus more on, how can they use this kind of data to build more intelligent bridges created by digital manufacturing processes. Just as well, it's going to be open to the TU Delft that's taking on a much more social approach. And then we hope other people will join in and use the data for their purposes.
And Alec, one question that keeps lingering in my mind, because Autodesk used to be, or still is, selling design software, and now you're developing into data collection software. Is this like a consistent move forward, or is this an incidental project?
No, I think this is the future for the company, because increasingly we're recognizing that design is not going to be done by simply, placing polygons in particular locations relative to one another. It's going to be driven by algorithms that are themselves going to be consuming data. And if we don't have a role in the collection of that data, we're no longer going to have the position we do in design.
So you're going to make a way to connect AutoCAD to Autodesk or AutoCloud or Auto whatever, and then the design and the data will be automatically connected into the design process.
That's right. Increasingly, we want to be a platform company and not a product company.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody who wants to add one more question to this? because then I would like to go on to our last part of the evening, the panel discussion. Thank you very much, Alec. Thank you very much, Gijs. It's a really, really interesting project. And I would like to invite Linda Vlasserood and Douwe Smit to the stage. Please come forward, grab a microphone. Now that we have designers using data to their designs, and we have designers collecting data, I thought it would be time to reflect a bit more on its broader implications. Could you explain a little bit more about Tada and what it's doing, and also how you have been listening to these different stories this evening? Now, everybody is leaving the audiences at some point. I don't know why. This is going to be really, really important, actually.
Yeah, not too complicated as well, hopefully. So, so my name is Douwe. I'm a freelancer, self-appointed data ethic guy. This is my website called Tada. It was made by 50 different parties from the city of Amsterdam. They designed a data manifesto. 6 principles or 6 basic values are in there that we came up together, that we think, like, if we're going to use data in our city to structure the city, make base decisions from municipality level to architecture or any kind of level, it needs values behind it. Not only because people kind of tend to think that data can be objective, as some people said here, but I think already tonight the crowd is pretty much aware that it's not, and it's subject to interpretation and abstraction. So these are some of these are the 6, actually, the 3 last ones. The idea behind it is a little bit that the value part gets a little bit lost sometimes when you think about data, and we want to put it back in there. I want to express that that a lot of these values come from a different background than what I hear tonight. So if you ask me what I learned tonight, is that I feel a lot of people here come from an architecture background. I'd like to say I'm from the internet. That is my background. But there's a lot of value to learn in there, because some of the models that we're talking about tonight have already been tried and tested on the internet on a different scale, but maybe qualitatively quite equal. I think if you want to have the best comparison between the internet and our physical environment, you can take the train here in the Netherlands. You can go to Zoetermeer. I think the Zoetermeer is like the internet made physical, because the actual city center of Zoetermeer is a mall. It's a private-owned place where you can be if you want to shop, and if you can transmit some part of your data and be allowed to be there. So it's not a normal city center like a dam where everybody is welcome, but it's like a private place. And this is basically the internet. You know, it was the idea. It's going to be open for everybody, but we see that the internet has transformed into data silos, huge servers, privately owned companies who control the data and who control what is going on.
So what's happening in Zoetermeer is worse than what you've seen today? Or
of course, it's also brilliant that the head of the Dutch Secret Service has their headquarters also in Zoetermeer. Like, it's too beautiful to be true,
right?
almost.
Proximity is important.
Yeah. But if you look at that kind of comparison, I think it's quite valuable, because then also the things we talk about tonight, like there's an old meme of a dog sitting behind a computer, like a little drawing. It says, like, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Now we know, because of the NSA and Snowden, that that's not true. Everybody knows you're a dog. And now we see that even bridges can know you're a dog or not. So it's wild how this comparison holds. And also, like, if you want to remove a camera because people don't want to be filmed on the street, but then you're going to make a bridge that is so accurate at fingerprinting who you are you not replacing the camera with some kind of other detection mechanism? You know, that is the questions that I
was wondering about that, because Alec mentioned that because of the sensors and how precise they are, you could remove the cameras, and that would actually add to the privacy of people.
Yeah,
Do
but
you
then
agree to that?
No, because in a camera you can see, and you can maybe evade. But if you want to get across, the bridge is the only option you have. So in a way, you create a monopoly also on the data. Where hanging cameras is not something I agree with, but it's something that more people can do. Building bridges is kind of like an exclusive activity, I would say.
This is maybe the point for Linda Vlasserood to join in. Sorry, you were just taking a sip of water. You're curator, writer, but also part of the data studio and the Embassy of Data, a research project for the last 3 years. recently concluded. Could you explain a bit more about the project and also what reflects back on this night, this evening tonight?
Okay, well, the Embassy of Data, is it working?
Maybe it isn't, but
then I'll take it.
This one is.
Okay, then you keep this one.
Okay, thank you.
Well, the Embassy of Data was the conclusion of the 3-year program because this was a collaboration between the New Institute in Rotterdam and the city of Eindhoven. So it was a collaboration, and it was really about how do we connect data to the reality of the street. Because Eindhoven, like many other cities, wants to be a smart city. And of course, the discussion through the smart city, since we can develop all kinds of sensors and applications and tools, generate data. However, we know that a lot of subjects are not being covered by data, and there's a lot of misreinterpretation of data. So we wanted to connect the data to the reality of the street. So what are the wishes, the needs, the ambitions of people, and how can data and technology help them? Or how can data and technology help to solve bigger problems in society? And the Embassy of Data was basically the conclusion, as I really wanted to create a sort of conversation piece and open up the black box of data collection. Because we are now talking about a bridge, but there are so many living labs all over the Netherlands and also in other countries that we are part of, and we have no clue. It was Fred, who was talking about, data is the future, we need to relate to it. Well, data is already here, technology is already here. So it's something that is surrounding us on a daily basis, which is totally intransparent, intangible, but we are part of it. Also through our mobile phones, we play a key role in the gathering of data. So I really wanted to open up the box. So what we did is, this was in the form of V&D, so it was an empty shop. To really, so I drew a circle of 400 meters.
In Eindhoven,
in
right?
Eindhoven,
In the city center, yeah.
In the city center, so it was 400 meters around it, and I wanted to figure out what data was being collected by the city government and what they wanted to do with it. So what you can see here now is that even though I was working for 2 years already with the city government, I managed to get only 11 data sets because I didn't want to hack and I didn't want to go to Google or Facebook because they wouldn't give me anything. And of course, those are the biggest companies that collect data in our public space. So what you see here are sensors in traffic bins, traffic lights, municipal cameras, the air sniffers, parking or traffic lights. Well, anyway, so those were 11 data sets, and it was quite interesting to see that because I really wanted to figure out what data is being collected where, for what purpose, and is that data open or not to the public. And I managed.
Is one of the conclusions that the city of Eindhoven itself has lots of non-open data sets that they do not share but do collect?
Yeah, well, at that time they had more than 500 data sets, of which only 38 were open. And when they were open, they were shown on an open data portal with just numbers. And of course, numbers don't mean anything. It only becomes meaningful if you interpret it. So hardly anything was open. However, they call themselves a smart city. So what you see is there's a big gap between a beautiful branding and that when you look at the data sets which are not connected, most of the data sets are just old-fashioned Excel sheets. So the real-time gathering of data is very minimal. And most of the data is, of course, not being gathered by the government, but by market parties that won't share that knowledge. So that's the complicated thing. Also, when you talk about data, of course, you should talk about data, the quantitative data, but also the qualitative data and stories and social media, because that's also what we did. We started to collect stories and see how that was supported by quantitative data. And then you come to the data deserts that you described. But of course, there is a huge, what's the level playing field when you talk about the market, the government, and then citizens, but also knowledge institutes that need to work with that data. So there's a lot of data fetish.
Yeah. Do you share the worries of Linda?
Yeah, and I also saw your installation. I really liked it. I must say, and it really shows also. And I think the bridge also a little bit has this problem, as I understand. Like, you can open data sets, which sounds really great, but if you need specialized hardware and software almost to analyze the data and to make anything meaningful out of it, the amount of people who can do something with it is going to be very limited. Now, I understand if your plans are also to maybe abstract the data a little bit to make it more accessible to citizens who can maybe see. But also in the abstraction, there's going to be choices again. And I think the question was already raised, right? Who owns the data? Like, does it? If the goal of Autodesk is to become a platform for the data, what does it mean for the future bridges that are going to be built? Are they always going to be built on that data set? And does it? Yeah.
I'm standing next to Alec and Gijs. Okay, I thought you might want to react to the comments you just got from both of them, of Douwe and Linda. Would anybody of you like to respond to that? Because you are collecting the data, a designer, let's say, and a company. How do you react to the?
I'm perfectly sympathetic to all of the criticisms. One of the reasons why I would like in the bridge in the pier to over-censor that is to find out how far you go with sensors before you start to get into the danger of actually being able to recognize individuals, so that we can establish that baseline and we can stay well away from it as we start to develop a software that says, okay, here's how you could instrument your bridge, any given structure you're doing, so that you could tell how many people were on it, so that we can understand those boundaries. But no, you're absolutely right, that we don't want to simply replace one form of surveillance with a more subtle and even more pervasive form of surveillance. I'm completely sympathetic to those concerns.
Yeah, and then there's also the problem that it's maybe your data set that can put a boundary in there that says, like, we're not going to collect too sensitive data. You know, everybody here knows of the GDPR and what kind of data sets suddenly became personal data that we weren't aware of. But if you collect a certain amount of data, you're going to have it open and transparent in some kind of way. It can be combined with other data sets by other parties, still opening like a Pandora's box of possibilities of people to be surveilled. I think the most important part is what Tada is trying to do is not so much saying like let's not do this, but it's more, and I think some people already mentioned it tonight as well, with the Funda house, for example. It's like, what are the values? We're not building a house of so many square meters. It's like, how do we want to live together? What are we want to achieve in this city? And can we take those principles or those values as the starting point for our design, instead of seeing if we can solve them afterward if we have the data?
Linda, an aspect of your project is that designers can play a role in increasing the awareness of data surveilling systems or cameras or all sorts of things. Could you explain a bit more on that?
Well, I think designers in general have a very important role to play in all of this. I was just referring to this living lab. Stratum Zijnd in Eindhoven is a very well-known example. It's just that when you walk through it, you have no idea that you're part of a living lab. So one of the design challenges, I think, for the future is how can you make data collection more transparent and therefore more accountable, and therefore have a critical conversation also that you as a person who perhaps don't want to be part of that living lab, that you also can take a decision to do otherwise. Now you might have a little sign which is, well, it's possible that you haven't seen it, and if you have seen it, you might not know what it means, and that you also are offered a choice to behave differently. So that means that you need to think differently about how do we make this transparent in our public space, and we need designers for that. In addition to that, I think we urgently need also urban planners to relate to these issues, because data and technologies are already changing our cities very rapidly. Not so much like in the physical context of houses or buildings, but really how do we perceive cities? And we all know the stories about Uber and Airbnb. So there is a great deal of an effect. But if we want to talk about what type of city do we want to become, we also need to take data into account, or technologies much more, or say in addition to mobility and circularity that is always listed, but we need to add this component to it very rapidly.
Yeah, maybe also adding to that, I think Stratum Zijnd also, as a good example, shown that non-personal data can become personal very quickly. And with that, I mean, personal data doesn't always mean that it can identify you, but it can be personal in cause and effect. So if only the sound or the volume of sound in the street is measured, and based on a certain peak in sound, the police is being sent there, and I happen to be there and being arrested as part of a group, the very non-personal data of sound has become very personal in taking me into custody or something like that. So that's, yeah, something I want to add to this example. Yeah.
Is there another question or remark from the audience that you would like to share?
Yeah, we see what the future could look like in China right now with the social credit scoring system, where our faces are the signatures of where we are at any given time. So the concepts and principles and values that you're talking about, are those Amsterdam values, are those Western values, are those global values? And how can we use those devices like cameras or sensors to for urban research? Yeah, so and avoid the privacy, because I think the more tools we have to study, the better and more effective, more sustainable, more resilient kinds of cities we can build. But we need to start somewhere. We need tools to understand ourselves better.
Clearly, your first part of the question was, are these Amsterdam values? Yes, they are. They're designed by 50 groups group of individuals from the city of Amsterdam, also with that very much that goal. Like it's a little bit part of a wider movement, I could say, where in Europe there's a growing feeling that Silicon Valley values, or the Silicon values. But I should maybe coin that tonight. Silicon values.
Quite brilliant.
Yeah, and the Chinese values, kind of like where we get our hardware from, where we get our software from, our value sets in themselves need to be recognized as such and can be fought over and maybe replaced by our own values. But it should always be like a group of people in a local area who decide like how their value system works and how they want to apply it. And very much so when it comes to like very, how do you say it, like fast systems like data, you know, it's not easy to replace all the data systems that Google and Facebook are going to make. But if we want to have a good answer, we have to think about how we're going to apply sensors and camera systems and that to make our own data sets that we can then apply our values to, or maybe already from the beginning. So yeah, I think there's a lot to win in that regard. Yeah.
No, I mean, there are very big differences between different continents, even Canada versus the United States versus Europe. I think the biggest issue on privacy is felt in Europe. Of course, in China, there's a whole different notion of it. So that's something that we need to take into account. And what you are just referring to is that what you've seen, for instance, in Madrid and Barcelona, is that they changed the Airbnb to a local system. So it's also about creating more awareness about what a global system does to your city, and that you can find other strategies for that, taking the ethics into account. But that you need to also that the government needs to play a very important role in this. As a sort of level playing
the government
field.
is not present today, because we would have liked to bring this back to the responsibilities of municipalities, for example. But for now, I would like to thank you very much for your contribution to the debate and how you brought us from Funda House to Silicon Values, which is actually quite a good phrase. Thank you very much, and a warm round of applause, please. And I would like to conclude with Jeroen Attenveld, as he started our evening with this really nice and feel-good project of the Funda House. Having seen how the evening developed, do you think we can learn something from the Funda House experience to bring it to the bigger scale of cities or even continents?
Well, what I found interesting was that here our interpretation of the data made it to this design. So I'm kind of interested to know from the last two speakers. I also hear kind of criticism, what you can do with data. But if you look at it in a positive way, what could you do with the data to make the city a bit better? And how could you do that?
And shall we ask Douwe if he has a clue?
No, but I think you have a very good example with your house where you say like, we use a big data set, but we start with the values of how we think people want to live. And in the end, it's about making that step that's so important, that you don't start from, maybe we have a big data set, let's see how we can monetize this and have an exit as fast as possible. You know, it's also about the business models that you think behind it. Are we going to be a platform? Are we going to be the monopoly? I think Funda has a lot of data. Is their aim with this project to be the only housing provider of the Netherlands, like the Uber of housing in the Netherlands? Is that the mindset, or is really the mindset, no, we want to understand better how people want to live, and that is actually the goal of our company, that we want to improve on that?
Thank you very much. I would like to end this evening. Thank you very much for your participation in the audience. Thank you to all the speakers. We had quite a lot. They're on Bart, Bram, Linda, Jeroen, Douwe, Mira. Fred already left, with good reason, by the way. We learned a lot. At least I learned a lot today, and I really liked the scope from the Funda house to the bigger scale, and also I think that the awareness of how data are not objective, and how they can be good if we use them to make better cities, and how we can actually get the data to create these better cities is still, I think, some desert to plant or to flower, how would you call it? But thank you very much for all your appreciation and attention. Thank you very much.